I'm here today with Senator Michael Moore, a recently re-elected senator, and we're going to spend a few minutes with him to find out a little bit about this year, some of his past accomplishments, and some things we're looking at going into the future. So to start it off, Michael, could you tell us now, you were recently sworn into the third term as state senator for our district. Can you tell us a little bit about the legislative process and where we are in that process for this legislative session?
Well, first of all, I want to thank all the supporters and all the voters in Grafton, for those who voted for me and supported me. Thank you for your support. Well, right now we got sworn in the first Wednesday of January, and we finished the bill sponsoring by the end of January. So we had a few weeks to put together all our pieces of legislation that we were going to file for this upcoming two-year session. I think I had approximately, a little over 60 bills that we've filed. Some were refiles from last session, and when I say session, that's the two-year term. That's the legislative session. And then we have some new pieces of legislation that we've put forth. And then after that, there's been a period that just ended last week where we all the legislators put their bills out to give everyone else the opportunity to co-sponsor. This way, in case we see an initiative that we want to support in the legislative process, we can co-sponsor the bill, and this way we're informed of when the public hearings are, so we can go testify, or if anyone's looking to support an initiative, they know who to contact. So the bill signing period's over, the co-sponsoring period has just ended. We're actually now starting to, then we got our committee assignments.
I was going to talk to you about that.
Yeah,
Could you tell us a little bit about what committees you were on this year versus in the past?
Well, my first term, the first 2 years, I was the chair of the Committee on Small Business and Community Development. I was vice chairman of the Committee of Public Safety. I was on post-audit and oversight and bonding. Then last term, I requested higher education, Committee on Higher Education, vice chairman of Public Safety, Senate Ways and Means, and then on the post-audit and oversight again. Well, this term, I requested the same committees. I received those committees, and I actually got an additional 3 committees. So now I've got, yeah, so.
You've got a lot of hearings coming up.
Yes. So I was also placed on the Transportation Committee, the Bonding Committee, and Labor and Workforce Development. So, yeah, so now the dilemma is going to be actually trying to get to all the hearings. And that's going to be a concern, because the way we work the hearings is I will contact my co-chair in the House, and we'll agree on the dates of the hearings. And then after we do that, we put it out to the committee members and let them know we're going to have a hearing on the state. Well, now I have 6 other chairmen that will be doing that for the other committees I'm on. So, you know, I just have to make sure that I'm not missing too many where, you know, transportation could be having a hearing when we're having and I'm attending a public safety hearing, and because if you look at, we're in session, formal sessions on Thursdays, sometimes Tuesdays, and then you have the hearings taking place. And then the House is in session, I believe they're in session on Tuesdays. So we've got to try to fit the hearings in Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So, so I'm happy to get the additional assignments, especially where there's been talk of a possible transportation bond bill that maybe the governor's office may be looking at doing. There's a talk of another higher education bond bill, and the bond bills are usually infrastructure investments.
Right.
So to be on the Transportation Committee during this process should be beneficial, and also the Bonding Committee, because the Bonding Committee will have some oversight.
It ties in with it.
It ties in, yeah.
As well as with higher ed.
Yes, and the labor and workforce development, a lot of the initiatives that we've done in higher ed over the last 2 years have been trying to tie more of our workforce and their retraining, job issues into that. So everything mixes well, and actually public safety in the Senate President has already indicated that any gun legislation that's going to be coming forth will be going through the Public Safety Committee. So
you're going to have your hands full with that one.
It's going to be a busy year.
Yeah.
So basically what happens now is the filing periods are over, all the clerks in the House and the Senate are now assigning the bills to the various committees. And once that's completed, we will then start the hearing process. We'll get notified once the bills are all set, and then we'll start picking hearing dates. And at that point, when we have the hearings, that's when we will have a public notice going out when the hearings will be taking place. And anyone from the public regarding any sort of legislation that they want to come testify on is invited to the hearing. We usually have a desk either right outside or just inside the hearing room, and where you can, there's a list of the bill numbers, a little open space next to it where you can sign your name to if you want to testify to the bill. And again, the co-chairs, the chairman of the committees will chair the meetings. And what we'll usually do is, again, with this 5,000 bills filed, a lot of times you'll have the same initiative filed by 3, 4, or 5 different legislators. So if we have that, we'll group the bills together. So this way, if you're coming in to testify on, say, Bill 1000, but there's 3 other bills that deal with the same issue, we'll group those together. We'll call people up who have signed up to testify for those bills. Once those, then everyone's allowed, in theory, 3 minutes to come up to testify. 3 minutes into 10 minutes into, and that's actually, everyone thinks it's easy to chair a hearing, but when you have someone that's driven an hour, sometimes 2 hours, to come in to testify, you feel bad having to drop the gavel and saying,
yeah, somebody from Pittsfield or from Truro,
yeah,
opposite ends of the state, you're right, it's about a 2-hour drive.
Right, and just if they've come in just to talk to you for 3 minutes, you feel bad having to stop them after 3 minutes. So a lot of times you let them go far beyond. Once the hearing process is over on bills, well, actually even during the process, because the hearings will go on from hopefully from March or April through, we have to get them done, I believe, by February. There's a definitive date that we have to have the hearings done. Once those hearings are complete, well, during that process, if we have a hearing, say we do 20 bills, we can then put for an executive session where we can discuss the bills, and at that point we would actually have a vote. We would take a poll of all the members, and we would vote to release. We would release bills, and when the bills get released, they can either get released to, we can release them with a favorable opinion recommendation to pass, an unfavorable. We could send a bill that if we think a bill needs to go for further study, we can send it for study. And the bills can, any money bills dealing with revenue or anything that's going to have any cost to the Commonwealth, has to go through Ways and Means. So if it's a House bill, and you can tell the bill by, a Senate bill will be S, and then the number, House would be H, then the number, and you can send them to either branch. So the money bills have to go to the various Ways and Means. Or if you say we had a bill in higher education that was dealing with workforce, labor and workforce development, we may think it's a good bill. We could exec it out of our committee favorably, but we could send it to the Committee on Labor and Workforce Development so that they have the opportunity to weigh in on it also. And then the bill would go out. And once it goes to Ways and Means, then it's the same process. Ways and Means would have the opportunity to have its members look at the bill, and then you can, they'll put it out to a vote, and then Ways and Means can either, again, they can send it out to the floor, to the House or Senate floors for votes or debates. And then basically if it gets passed on the Senate floor, then we have to send it to the House. Then after the House votes on it, they have to send it back to the Senate. We vote on it again. Then it goes back to the House. And then it goes to the governors for signing. So it's a long process. There's actually been bills that have gone from the House vote on it, they send it to the Senate, we'll vote on it, then it has to go back to the House.
Right.
And during that, from the time because if there's any changes from the language they sent over to us, when it goes back to the House, there's times it never comes back because the House doesn't agree to it. Usually, a lot of times, that's more the formal stages of, okay, it's completed, send it back there, they've got to just rubber stamp it and send it back to us. But sometimes, the bill, you'll make a minor change to it, and that minor change will send the bill back, and you'll never see it again.
Reaction, right?
Yes.
And sometimes you run out of time too. The calendar, as you said, it has to be approved by both houses to go to the governor within a set time frame, and if it's not, it dies.
Yeah, and once a bill dies, when the legislative session obviously ends, the bills have to be refiled again. Now the governor, when it gets to the governor's desk, he has 10 days to sign the bill. So, and then...
Okay. That's a good insight into the legislative process, but you mentioned, now that we have a better understanding, you mentioned that in the past you've been involved in some of these because of your position in the Senate. Are there some of these bills that you were particularly proud of that you sponsored and had enacted?
Actually, there was one bill that stemmed from my first term. When I got assigned to the Committee on Community Development and Small Business, actually when I first got elected, you sit down with if you're in the House, you sit down with the Speaker. If you're in the Senate, you sit down with the Senate President. So that's when the economy was first in the deep recession. So I wanted a committee dealing with the economy, business, trying to help stimulate small businesses. So I asked for so she gave me the Committee on Community Development and Small Business. We decided to do a tour of the state, and we met with all the various chambers. And one of the issues that came up was what was called a fair share. And that's where companies had to, or small businesses, between 11 FTEs, full-time equivalent employees, and 50 full-time equivalent employees. And actually, I think the first constituent who called me on the issue were the Carlsons from Grafton, because they own Suburban Staffing. And they had an issue with what was going on. And at the same time, we were getting calls from some other businesses, actually from even outside my district. And it all had to do with the way that the fair share was calculated and how it was being enforced. At the time, they had to go onto a website, and you'd have to input the information for this filing called the HERD form. You'd have to input it through the computer. But if you made a mistake on it, you couldn't just simply go back and correct it. If you made the mistake on it, you had
start all over again.
Well, no, you'd have to actually submit an affidavit to the Secretary's office or to that agency, and right. But what they would do is they would base an assessment on that. Yeah. So we're hearing this long problem, and then if you can put in for an appeal. While you're waiting, some people were waiting 6 months to a year for an appeal, and while you're waiting for the appeal, they were also accumulating interest because they were being charged an assessment, not a penalty. So actually, Representative Peterson from Grafton, he had actually been working on the issue. Also, he got notified of the issue, so we were both actually working on it. And from the Senate end, this past session, last session, we were finally able to get through some legislation that would the first session we made some minor changes to it. We actually had oversight hearings. We had the Secretary's office come in. We talked about the auditing process and how there wasn't a formal standard that you could go into your business. The auditors looked at A through D. You go into this next company, they would look at different items. So we had Secretary Goldstein, who had just taken over that labor and workforce development, come in. And actually, she from the former secretary who she replaced, she made a lot of changes. She worked well trying to update the filing systems and for the companies to input their data. So we made a lot of corrections. But the one we had was the fair share, where companies, if you couldn't meet the benchmarks for filing your health insurance or covering your health insurance at 25% benchmark, they would be fined $295 per person. So, so that can be expensive. And we had some companies that one company I can remember came in and had a $100,000 assessment pending. Yeah, so and the goal is to try to.
Now, is it clarified so that we don't have conflict between the federal health care as well as now? Well, now there is the state.
Well, that's actually what actually just recently helped out. When by the end of the last session, we were able to get the FTE and the problem was with the the determination of having who you had to cover, they didn't allow for companies who had employees who may have had insurance by a spouse, may have been had maybe through the veterans who maybe had coverage through the Veteran Services,
Yep.
Mass Health, Medicare. So you could have a company that, hey, say had 49 employees. 39 of them could have had coverage from a spouse or another means.
Spouse, yeah.
So this company couldn't qualify, couldn't meet the benchmark. So they were getting fined, even though they were doing everything that they were supposed to do to try to provide health insurance. So we were able to get those, we were able to get legislation passed where they would factor that in. So companies now would not have to deal with that. But actually what the governor just did, and this is actually a piece of legislation I was working on filing, and I did file, the governor, to make it correspond with the new federal health care, they're doing away with the fair share assessment for companies under the 50 full-time employees. This way, because the federal health care only has it from 50 FTEs and above, so we would have had a separate tier below. So to make it correspond to the federal ACA, they're filing legislation to remove that whole set of requirements. But that took 3.5 years.
Well, I can understand that, but that's an important one, particularly now, as you say, with the federal standard here and the state was here. You'd be paying for a state penalty and not the federal. So
yeah,
it impacts negatively on business in that regard.
Yeah, and you know, small businesses are really everyone thinks of the big companies, but the small businesses are really the backbone, yeah, of the economy.
I remember when you were in there prior to this term, something about the senior circuit breaker tax.
Well, senior circuit breaker, I was on. Oh, actually, I was on the committee for elderly affairs, and we worked on increasing the senior circuit breaker. And actually, I've co-sponsored legislation this year with Senator Cream, and we're looking at that to see if we can try to get an increase on that also for our seniors right now.
So now you're going even further then?
Yes, yeah.
As a senior citizen, I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, it was actually funny. Yesterday we were in session, and someone had an amendment filed on public benefits, yep, and how you could qualify for it. And it was actually more the proof of residency that they were, to make sure that you were a citizen, make sure that you were a Massachusetts resident, and you met all the, and Pat Jalen, Senator Jalen, who sits next to me, chairs the Elder Affairs Committee, and she's chaired that the 4 years that I've been in office. So we're looking at this, and I tell you, this criteria that whoever had drafted it, it was so confusing. You had to, one of the requirements was showing that your parents were born in the United States, and so basically you needed or have one of their passports. It was so complex and confusing, and so I'm looking at it, and luckily she sat right next to me. So I just said to her, showed it to her, I said, where do our seniors fit in here? I mean, are they going to have to? I'm thinking to myself, like, I don't have my mother's birth certificate. I don't have my father's birth certificate. I don't have this from them, yeah, or their other information. And so we were sitting there, and I said to her, could this hurt the seniors? And she's looking at it, and she says, yeah. I mean, just think about it. Do you have a lot of the personal information that your parents may have had when? Actually,
I do, but thinking of it, a lot of people my age now, their parents have died, and if they don't have it, where are you going to get it?
And if you have it, if you, like, now my sister may have it, my brother may have it, but I don't know that.
That's right.
So where you don't have if you don't have a driver's license, well, then you can't use that as your identification. So I mean, the intent of the legislation was a good intent, but the content of it got so confusing.
Well, moving from that then, now this is your third term.
Yes.
And in the past, you've supported bills that haven't been enacted.
Yep.
And are you going to fight to have some of those enacted, or do you have new legislative initiatives that you're contemplating, or that you did put in to sponsor? Yeah,
we're going to, there's one bill that we've had a couple bills that I was able to get as amendments, get passed through amendment process to, yep, larger pieces. One was a bill to decriminalize certain misdemeanors, because a lot of times right now, you could have police officers on, say, it could be a town bylaw or ordinance or say like a trespassing or disorderly conduct, where rather than the police officer having to arrest you on something, that instead of that or a criminal complaint, where they give you the citation, you have to show up in court, they could give you a non-criminal. So this way, one, it saves the police officer's time, it saves the municipality time and money, where the police officer now does not have to take you to court. There's no bringing you back to the station, booking you, going through the arrest process. It could get people out of the criminal justice system, can save the backlog on with some of the cases we have in court, reduce the amount of cases going in. So we ended up getting that passed as part of the Senate version of the, I think it was the sentencing reform, but when it came out of the conference committee, they couldn't get the House to support it, which actually was, it also would have been savings for the cities and towns, because now a police officer wouldn't have to be sent to the courts.
To the courts, which is expensive because
which
it takes
on overtime.
Yeah.
So we're pursuing that again. There's another one that we filed that it's called K2, or synthetic marijuana. And actually, when I filed it, we were working with some people in the city of Worcester. It's the incense. You can go to some of these, you know, like the
I don't go
gas.
to those places.
Well, no, well, it's one like the I don't want to say like what type of business. You go to these gas stations, you know, and they sell incense and all that in there. Well, there are kids that there's certain types that can be used as synthetic marijuana, so they burn it. But there's been cases, there's been severe reactions to it where kids have died. Some have gone into the hospital. So we filed this legislation last session. The federal government has actually banned it now, but so there was some confusion when it first came down whether we then had to do something on the state side. So now we've refiled the bill, and now we've actually tried to establish. We've spoke to the DEA's offices and the Attorney General's office, and we're trying to get some appropriate fine levels that we're putting in the bill now to make our statutes correspond with the federal legislation. So there's that.
How about the one with the Affordable Care Act? Have you?
Well, that's the dealing with the fair share. That's the one that we've.
That's the same one we talked about earlier.
Yes, that was the one that we talked about earlier. That's one now where with the implementation of the ACA, the federal the ACA is going to eliminate from the 50 FTE and below.
Okay.
There's also one on foreclosure that we're trying to do. There was a case, the United States person, Ibanez.
Ibanez is the case, yeah.
And there's this has to do with there was some confusion when it first was filed that we were trying to protect banks. But what we're trying to do is we're actually trying to protect the whole process, in that it establishes a deadline on when certain documents are passed and when a foreclosure can actually be implemented, and what certain protections. So this way, you're not buying a house, and then you're in the house for 6 months, 7 months.
Somebody comes back and says, "Hey, it's mine."
It's my house.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had this filed last year. We got a lot of favorable responses from the Attorney General's office in different groups, but the problem was this case was pending. So no one really wanted to act upon this.
Until they had an understanding of where they were.
Right, where the case was going to go. So
Right.
Now the case has been settled. So we're actually hoping that this will be part of the Senate President during her opening address for the Senate said that a couple of initiatives that she wants to work on this year was welfare reform, more welfare reform, foreclosure protections or for the foreclosure issues, and transportation. So I'm hoping as part of the foreclosure issues that she's pushing forth that we can actually get this to be part of those reforms.
Well, let's get to another topic here that really resonates in the town of Grafton. And I know you're well familiar with the situation that I'm talking about. The gas storage area in North Grafton.
Yes.
Would you give us your thoughts on it? Because I know you've been active in it and have contacted the federal legislators about this too. But could you give us, all of us, a little bit of a synopsis of where you are? Because they finished the closing statements, I believe, on Monday.
Yep.
And on the 11th. And I had talked to you about it before. So.
Well, when I was first contacted by Dennis Flynn regarding this, when we sat down here at Dunkin' Donuts in Grafton, my first dealing with this whole preemption issue dealt with when we were in Millbury. We actually had a company that came to Millbury that we ended up, and they were using this preemption as their justification for coming in, and but we, the Board of Selectmen in town, we actually ended up voting to do what Grafton did. We actually filed with the, we actually filed with the Surface Transportation Board, and when we did that, the company never followed through. They actually left. So when I was talking to Dennis, you know, he told me he knew what was going on, which really wasn't a lot. At that point, it just seemed to be rumor. So we discussed. I told him what I knew about it, and so that I would agree to talk to the town, see what's going on, and from that, it led to we worked with the town and Dennis, and we actually held a forum up at the Grafton High School,
right.
Excuse me, Municipal Center. We held the forum up there, and we had someone from the Surface Transportation Board to come in to actually explain everyone what the preemption is. And actually, at this time, John DiPascoli, he actually contacted us, and he wanted to be part of the forum so he could explain to everyone what he was going to do. So, and at that point, it was all rumor. No one actually had any idea what he was actually going to be putting out. They just knew the railroad was coming in, something was coming in, and there was a activity up there. So he came in, he explained the program. The individual from the Surface Transportation Board, who had actually flown in from Washington that day, did his best to explain the preemption issue. And it's very difficult because every circumstance is different, and it evolves around the railroad, if the activities there is actually a railroad function of the railroad or the train. But that can be a different interpretation based on the facts of the case. So, so there's a lot of, I think there was 200 or 300 people that attended. The town has since filed, they did a cease and desist, and it's now gone to court.
The cease and desist was, well, it was served, and that's why they're going to the courts now to get a decision.
I also think that I think there's been some discussion too about. I think the judge did ask that the town and
he did ask if
that they meet to see if they can come to an
and
agreement.
the Grafton Upton Railroad representatives would get together and see if they could not hammer out some kind of an acceptance agreement between the two parties. Right.
Now, see, this is where it gets confusing, because under this, a town can, or there's groundwater.
Yep.
Or, the EPA can, and DEP, I guess they have some rights as far as ensuring that the groundwater is not going to be contaminated. Or the town may have some rights where you can come in and see if they're complying with building regulations, but you can't enforce the regulations. So there's a big gray area.
Well, there's even the Department of Defense can get into this because of the fact that Washington Mills makes abrasives. It's one of the largest abrasive makers in the United States. And they need those in defense industries, the abrasives. Right. Then you go to the other side, and you got the North Grafton complex up there with Wyman Gordon. Yeah. They make the titanium ingots. They need those for some of the tanks. They need them for the... And
then you got the mass fire regulations that have to be complied with.
Yeah.
But you have to comply with them again, but what can be enforced is
well, that's the whole thing.
That's right. And you know, and it's funny now, again, just the other night, because it was in the paper again about the closing arguments. So just the other night, we actually have an issue going on in CSX in Worcester with the blowing of the horns and the neighborhood.
The noise after a certain hour.
I was putting my son to bed, and it was, and about a mile and a half behind it in my house, you know, we get train tracks, and we could hear the train going by and the horn, and so it made me think not, if people realized what activity train activity goes on at night and what's going through there. I mean, it's one of the leading transportation services that we utilize in transport merchandise. And with the cost of fuel today, it's very cost effective. So it's something that a lot of communities are having to deal with again, that they didn't think that they would deal with.
The thing too is that, like anything, times have changed. Yeah. And some of the chemicals they put on the tracks now,
Oh,
they never even had before. If people knew it, that's why they send it at night,
right.
because then they may not have demonstrations against it.
But if you think about all the sources of energy that we're going to now, they're all sources that were used many years ago. Wind turbines. I mean, wasn't as
Right.
sophisticated, but we're going to wind power now. Hydropower they're trying to use. Trains are coming back as far as because they can transport more merchandise or material.
Well, all I can recommend and suggest is you keep on contacting Senator Warren,
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Okay. Yeah. We sent
Congressman
Mr.
McGovern, because they've been involved to a certain extent also. I know you've been
Yeah.
in contact with them before, but
Congressman McGovern actually came out here and he met with the town. So he's been fully apprised of it. And what we did is we sent a letter to Congressman McGovern and Senator Warren asking them to see if look, we realize that we can't change the whole law, but if there's some way that they could clarify
yep.
the authority aspect of preemption.
Well, that's why I said earlier, relative to the fact that times have changed, and some of this legislation goes back to the 1860s when they were encouraging
Yeah.
and giving carte blanche to the railroads.
And it makes sense when you have this. You can't.
And you had open space.
Yeah, and you can't have Millbury. The tracks coming through Millbury a speed limit of 20 miles an hour there, and you can only operate during these hours. Then you come into Grafton, the speed limit is this, and you can only operate during hours.
Well,
so I mean,
and again, going back to the 1860s, they had nothing but plains for miles and miles.
Yeah.
Now you got a train that's going by a school.
Yeah.
This public safety is very, very important to everyone.
And water supplies.
It's just swept aside.
Yeah, yeah, no, it really is. So
It needs to be addressed. But we're running short of time, and I want to get to one more, at least, and that's the construction on 146. The governor, even the president, has said the infrastructure.
Yep.
And one of the infrastructure pieces that is important to the people coming out of the valley is that intersection at 146.
and Boston Road.
Yes, Boston
Yep.
Road. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And,
Well, I do know that Senator Dick Moore and I, we actually were contacted by.
Dick Moore is an old friend of Grafton. I
Yes.
keep on reminding people.
Who's now
years and years ago, he was our state rep.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, really? Oh, you didn't even know that.
No. Well, he's actually just with this past session, he's finally given up the healthcare committee, and he's actually
That has been a baby of his for years.
It really has, and he's now been put in as the president pro tem. So the Senate president, there's the majority leader, then there's Dick Moore, Senator Moore. So
Yeah.
he's with all his years of service, he's been elevated.
Good man.
Very good man. So we had gotten a lot of complaints that the flyover that was going to go over there was so costly, and the money just wasn't available. So we actually the governor came out and met us and some Mass Highway officials.
I remember that. He was about half an hour late because of the traffic jam
Yes.
to get to the meeting.
Well, and that was part of when we set the meeting up. We wanted him to go through that. So
He didn't go through fast.
So they saw the traffic, and we explained to some. We actually talked about some of the economic development opportunities on both sides of 146 that were available if we could just get some better egress on and off the road. And so they approved. They looked at this, and they ended up coming back and approving some additional lanes being added. And I believe the lanes are going in. It's supposed to start groundbreaking this spring, I
Yes.
think. So
That's what I understand is the case.
yeah.
I
So
also understand that there's a supermarket, a grocery store chain interested. There was a parcel of land on the northbound side
Yep.
just before you get to Boston Post Road that was slated for development stores, and apparently that interest is regenerating now that there's going to be some construction on 146.
good.
So it's a story that's starting to develop again. But I look at that and I say to myself, the flyover would have cost a little more. The governor's asking for taxes to address the infrastructure. Excuse me. And why not do the flyover? If you're going to get billions of dollars, spend the $5 or $6 million now, get the flyover, and make it better. But
the flyover is going to cost much more than the $5 or $6 million, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
And at the time when they were looking at this, they weren't talking this major investment. The investment that the governor's talking about, that you referenced, the $1.9 billion, is all dependent upon a lot of new revenue that he's put forth, that he's submitted as part of his budget to the House. And it's still yet to be seen the reaction from the House of Representatives.
And that could be a whole new hour-long discussion about the taxes and increasing the one set of taxes,
yeah,
and decreasing the sales tax. And
then there's a lot of exemptions in here that he, exemptions and deductions that he's recommended be eliminated, that I don't know how well that's going to, I mean, I looked at those deductions that he wants to do away with, and I wasn't very pleased.
Well, the reaction as reported by a lot of the legislators was not very overwhelming,
yeah.
Because of what you're saying. It impacted their constituency in a negative way in their eyes.
And a lot of them were exemptions that were going to be impacting everyone agrees that if you want a healthy economy, that you need a strong middle class. And a lot of these exemptions that are being recommended to be eliminated were actually, I saw as were directly negatively impacting the middle class. I mean, you can reduce the sales tax, that's great. But when you're taking money right out of people's pocket at the 6 1/4, and then 6 1/4 on the income tax, and then you're also now going in and hit some deductions that they're getting, taking additional money. I don't know. It's yet to be seen. And just so, actually, I don't know if you know, but the way the system works, or the Constitution is, that any tax increases have to start in the House of Representatives. So the Senate, we cannot pass initiate or pass a tax increase. It's got to be, we call it from the revenue bills or money bills piece of legislation, where if the House sends over, if the House in their budget sends over one tax increase to us in the bill, well, we can go from 1 to 3 to 5. You know, there's got to be one.
Expand upon it.
Right, but there's got to have one. So if they send over, so when the public's seeing the House budget, if they don't see any tax increases in there, then the Senate is restricted from being able to initiate any sort of tax increases.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting point. It's much like what happens at the federal level.
Yeah. 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 So we're all sitting and waiting to see what the House does with their budget.
Well, we're running out of time here, and what I'd like to do is ask people listening if they have any needs for assistance, if they have any topics they'd like us to discuss in the future, that they give your office a call at 617-722-1485. Let your office know. They'll get it to us, and we can sit again for time and discuss other possibilities and other issues as people see them of interest to them.
And you can also email the office. It's at michael.moore@masenate.gov. That's also a good way to do it. This way we get there's no confusing the question you're asking, you know, but please feel free to email the office. For any constituent services, questions here, we're more than happy to respond.
And I can speak from personal experience. I've talked to about a friend of mine that needed some assistance because of a health issue and retirement, and Mike has a very, very responsive staff. So I urge you and encourage you to don't hesitate to call.
And don't be discouraged if you don't hear from us that day, because there are times we get over 100 emails a day. So, but you will get a contact from us.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for spending this time with us.
Nice seeing you again. Thank you.
We'll see you again in future, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you.